This is the Birth of a Mama podcast, where birth, and especially postpartum, matter. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Birth of a Mama podcast. Today, I have Natalie Henning on the show with me. Natalie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm super excited for our conversation today. So let's just have you start off by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, the work that you do, and why you're so passionate about supporting moms.
Yeah, so I am a mom of three myself. I've got a 9, 6, and 3-year-old. So they keep me very busy. I am a nurse, and I've worked in a lot of different areas. I've been a nurse about 10 years. I started out heart and vascular, but then I had my first baby while I was a heart and vascular nurse for about 3 years. And that really, the way my nurses cared for me and things, it left such an impact on me. And so then I started looking for labor and delivery jobs. And then I transitioned to labor and delivery for 4 years. And it's a postpartum unit as well. So we take care of both labors and postpartum. And then I transitioned kind of at the beginning of COVID into the pediatric clinic that we have connected to our hospital. So I did that for 3 years, and I'm a lactation counselor, so I was able to use that in both those areas. And then I had a brief stint as a nurse care coordinator this past year and realized I just really missed working with moms and babies. So I came back to the hospital as a float nurse in September. And I love it. I get to do labor and delivery, postpartum, but also ICU and ED and med surg. So I actually see quite a bit, but also get to kind of follow moms through different areas of the hospital. I've had postpartum kind of issues come in through the ED, so I get to see a lot with that. So it's been kind of full circle, and it's just my passion. Moms and babies, I've just learned this is my passion in life. And I think because I'm kind of going through those stages as well as a human, I enjoy just kind of learning more about it myself and growing with these women as well.
I love it. I love that evolution of your path through nursing.
Yeah.
I always knew I wanted to be in the helping profession, and I kind of
Yeah.
considered nursing at one point. And yeah, like L&D would have been my dream, I think, nursing role, because I just love this area, the whole reproductive kind of health for women area. Yeah.
I just
it's awesome.
even in nursing school, I didn't think I would. I thought, well, maybe I'd be interested in it, but we didn't get much for clinicals in it. And so I always wanted to do ICU. And then it just, I think going through my own experience, I think that always changes anybody's perspective if they've, experienced something that impacted them. So.
Yeah. So I like to ask all of my guests this question as well. So if you had to describe your transition into motherhood in just 3 words, which would you choose and why?
That I think is a hard question. But I would say
Definitely.
I definitely I'm a little bit different. I loved the newborn stage, and I know that that's not the case for everybody. But so I would say beautiful, unpredictable, and transformational. The unpredictability, obviously, with anything, I feel like there was so much as a first-time mom that I thought I knew, but you don't know until you really get into it. And then I think just becoming a parent, obviously, it transforms you in many ways, difficult and not, so it just, you're always growing and learning. And so yeah, there's wonderful parts, but there are very tough parts as well, but that's what makes us who we are.
Yeah, well said. That's like one of the major lessons I've learned, and a theme that continually comes up on this podcast is like kind of this duality of motherhood, of having these really, really hard, like break you down to your core moments of like, I almost can't even do this anymore, or what did I get myself into? And then these amazing moments that you could never experience the depth of from probably any other life experience. So it's really incredible what motherhood brings to you, and what it shows you, and just that everything's a season. And so those are beautiful words. I love that.
When you said, I don't know if I can do this, that is literally when I had my first baby. I remember walking through the door to our apartment, and getting him out of the car seat and holding him and just thinking, what did we do? Can I be a mom? Am I good enough at this? I don't know. And I remember feeling such shame about that. And then, obviously as, time went on and looking back now, I know, that that's quite a normal feeling. And I talked to my patients about that. But yeah, I remember that exact feeling of, oh my gosh, can I do this? I don't know if I'm made for this. And I hadn't even gotten into it yet, So I think that's such a good acknowledgement of just those early days.
Oh, yeah. I got goosebumps when you were saying that because that brought me back to me bringing my daughter home and having those exact fears of like, oh my gosh, this is something I thought I wanted so badly. And here I am and I'm terrified and almost feeling like I shouldn't have done this. Like this was a bad idea,
Yeah.
And then it's awful to have even that thought, right? You're like, oh my God, I'm terrible for even that. But no, you're not. You're human
normal.
going through a very challenging transition where there is little support. So
Yes.
totally normal to feel that way, right?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So something I noticed on your Substack, Natalie, is talk of this like not perfect but well. And I love this. So can you elaborate on this a bit for the listeners?
Yeah, I think again, everything kind of stems back to my first experience in birth and parenthood with our first child. And I think, like I said at the time, I was a heart and vascular nurse. I hadn't, learned much about motherhood other than my birthing classes, and just what I've learned from my family. I have 4 sisters and things like that. We're all very open about things. But so I put a lot of pressure on myself. I think I'm just that kind of person. I'm not a perfectionist by any means. I do put a lot of pressure on myself for anything that I'm trying to set a goal in life, and so I took that into motherhood with me. And I think I put so much pressure on, or even when I had feelings like that, like we talked about, not feeling like I can do this, I didn't want to share that with my husband. That made me feel like I'm not doing this right. I'm not good enough. I'm scared. I'm, all these things that came in. Oh, I excel at all these other things in life. Why can't I excel at this? And so I put all this pressure on myself. And as I learned, as I got more into motherhood and had a second baby and a third baby, obviously I started to learn. And I think that's kind of how most people learn, is by going through it, and getting through just that hard time. And so I learned that, it doesn't have to be perfect. Life is not meant to be perfect. We are meant to learn through our difficulties. And I think just any of us who have gone through any kind of loss in life or life experiences, I think we do realize that we only have one life, and, we can either sit here and put all this pressure on ourselves, or we can say, hey, what went good today? Okay, I got the baby changed. We went out for a walk, the baby's fed, all the good things, but what else went well today? I don't have to sit here and cut myself down on things that didn't go well, or even just simple things like, where we live, or what kind of cars we drive. Like, who cares? As long as we're in a happy, healthy family home, we're taking care of each other. We seek support. There's so many good things in life that it's easy to look at all the sad things in the world and all the hard things and get really down about it. But I know this is getting very broad, but I think just like bringing it in and just even every hour of the day, what's something that went well? Like today in Wisconsin, it's raining and dreary. I got out, I took my dog for a walk, and it's okay. It was nice to get out, even though it's not a great day outside. It's just the little things, I think, in life that I'm just starting to notice now as a mom, like that's what matters, are these little moments make up your whole life. And I can either get down on things, or I can, and it's not to say that I don't, I still definitely do, but I have to have that mentality to flip myself back into, okay, let's look at the positives here. And some people might call it, like toxic positivity or something, but I don't look at it that way. I look at it as I need this to kind of get through my own anxieties or fears or anything. And I need to be able to look at life in a little bit of a different way so that I can manage all of these feelings that we feel as humans. So that was very broad, but
Yeah. No, that to me makes perfect sense. It makes me feel like, even in my own life, I think it's really easy, and I think maybe a lot of women, or at least mothers, could relate to this. It's really easy to start taking all the things in your life that are going really well, or that are really good, or that, you're full for. Like if you sat down to really think about it, you would be like, oh yeah, I'm very happy that I have this. But because you just have it, it's like your baseline every day, it starts to become really easy to take it for granted. And then we can easily get sucked into focusing on the things in our life that aren't going really well. And then that feels really over consuming, and it can feel like that's all we have is this, like, misfortune, which usually, not always, some people do have a lot of misfortune, and I'm not discrediting that, right? But like, usually there are more good things happening in our life, even in a time where it feels like all bad things are happening. Like, Natalie, I was just telling you before we started recording how this year so far has felt like just one thing after the next, right? Like, it was like right off the bat, I got laid off from my job, and then my husband had to go into a very minor surgery, but still a surgery. There's always a risk, right? And it was a surgery that made it so that he like couldn't pick up our daughter because he couldn't carry more than 10 pounds for 6 weeks. So that to me was immediately felt like more pressure on me, because now I have to do like pick up some more parenting work, and on top of it now I'm jobless, so I'm job searching. And then we got sick, and then we got sick again, and we were in the ER like multiple more times than I'm usually in a year, in a whole year, and it's been like just a couple of months. And it's such a good example of how I could have easily just played the victim and been like, woe is me, like life is horrible, like why do all these things keep happening to me, and tried to blame everyone else. And not that it's my fault, but like instead trying to just, focus more on in those little small moments, like you're saying, that make up your whole life. Like, what is going good? Like, if my daughter was still healthy, even if I was sick, that's a positive. If she's happy and smiling, if she's learning a new, some new milestone or something, she started preschool, like all these amazing, beautiful, wonderful things are also happening in the midst of the stuff that maybe isn't so great. But it is really hard to like switch that kind of focus and that perspective. It really just takes a conscious, like intentional effort to do so. And I think it helps to like listen to podcasts like this one, and it like can trigger like, oh yeah, maybe I have been dwelling too much on things that are out of my control. Like if we can't control it, that's another thing. Then it's really not helpful to like make our whole day go wrong. I think I saw one time this meme that was like, did you have a bad 5 minutes that you let become a whole entire day that you deemed to be bad, and you like basically milk that 5 minutes? Or did you have a bad 5 minutes and then say, you know what, let's move on from that and let's move forward and see what this opportunistic day has in store for me? So that's like just such a big perspective shift, but it can be really hard for people to even make that connection and like be have that awareness.
Yeah, and it's not even to say, I mean, it's your feelings are 100% valid. It's not to say you can never feel down, depressed, hopeless, because those are natural, normal feelings. We're talking a lot about this with my son who's 9, and he's going through some anxiety and things. So we talk a lot about feelings around here, and how they're normal and it's okay to have them. But so even I learn a lot more just teaching him than I do, teaching myself. And, but I think like, yeah, you have to like validate the feeling, know that it's there. Like, yes, this sucks right now, but what are we going to do to kind of come out of it? So sometimes you do have to sit in those feelings and be uncomfortable, but I think that's what brings change, not just in motherhood, but everything. This past year, like I said, I tried as a nurse care coordinator for like 6 months. And I enjoyed it, but it really took away from my family life. Like I was Monday through Friday, I was bringing work home, doing a lot at night. And I was like, like this, and our kids were busy on the weekend with traveling sports. I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like I miss moms and babies, but I left, this health system that I was with for a long time to go do this. And then you have the guilt of oh my gosh, I made this big change and I got to stick it out. But then I was like, no, I have to do what's right for me. And I think I needed that change and that like icky feeling of like something's just not right. Something just doesn't feel right with this. In order to come back and have a different perspective and realize the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And, I needed this to realize my passion is moms and babies. And so now I go to work and I feel like, well, what am I going to learn today? Like, yeah, there's going to be stuff. People are stressed about different things, but like, I just show up, I do my job, and I'm like, what can I do to help? So it's kind of nice. And you sometimes have to go through those really unfortunate situations to have a different perspective too, on life. And I think we all will have those moments in life. I mean, I was reading some things about grief and how, we're not immune to it. It's going to happen. We're all going to have grief in life. And it's what you kind of do with it, that can make a huge difference in your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's the human experience, right? Like we
Right.
all are meant to feel the full spectrum of emotions, and that includes the ones that make us feel really uncomfortable and that we don't like to sit with, right? So
Right.
that's kind of what makes it beautiful too.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. I also love your 5 tips for the first 5 days post that you have on Instagram.
Oh,
So today's conversation is kind of going to be related to that and was inspired by that. So we're going to have you give the listeners, kind of your top 10 tips for the first 40 days. So before we dive into the tips themselves, I think we hear a lot of this first 40 days. So why is this time period referenced so much, first of all, and like what makes it so important or so special?
yeah. I'm honestly very fascinated by, just studying the postpartum kind of phase. And I'm no expert by any means in this. This is just like what I've seen as a nurse, and my own experiences and things like that. But the first 40 days, we can also call it, kind of like the fourth trimester. So you have your 3 trimesters in pregnancy, and there is a transition in becoming a parent and the baby coming out of the womb and trying to, live in this big different world that they're not used to, right? So it's kind of a shock for the baby, as well, just as much as it is for us. And so I think, first of all, just having that perspective of, whoa, this is a huge change for mom and baby. So a lot of times when in the hospital after birth, and I do a lot of like prepping with my patients in the sense of like whether they're breastfeeding, formula, learning about like nighttime changes with baby and what they go through in the first few days. I like to prep them like what's normal so that I would notice, when I worked night shift a lot, I would notice that moms would call me in and say, something's not right. I just fed him and he's hungry again and I don't know why. Like he ate really good and now he's crying and I can tell he wants to eat. Like I must not have enough milk. And I'm like, actually, you know what? Your prolactin is your milk making hormone and it's highest between midnight and 5 a.m. And so we do anticipate babies to cluster feed between midnight and 5 a.m. because they're going to stimulate that prolactin, to get your milk to come in. So it's a normal cluster feeding time for them in these first few days. It's not going to be forever, but it is a normal thing. And you are making plenty of milk. And I will show them like the size of their baby's belly in reference to like a marble or, and say, their belly can only hold 5 to 7 mLs in this first day. And so your colostrum is wonderful, or whether they're supplementing a little bit with formula, like they're getting what they need from you. And so just giving them that perspective, first of all, I think to prepare even just those first few days postpartum of what's normal so that they can be confident. I think that's the biggest thing is knowledge is power. So having that confidence of, oh, okay, she said this was normal. I'm not going to worry about it. It's one thing I can just like check off my list. I'm not going to worry again about this, because you don't know what you don't know. And I was like that with my first baby. I remember feeling those things too. And so I think just like giving women and parents of all kinds, the perspective of, here's what's normal, here's what's not, here's what's expected. And anything that kind of varies off of that, don't be afraid to ask, you know. So I think kind of starting there and then realizing like those first 40 days or so ish, that is a huge time for just healing, transition. You're learning your baby's learning you. You're figuring out a groove at home, whether it's your first baby or trying to figure it out with siblings, you know. And so there's so much that goes into it. And I just find it fascinating that, you know, in the US, we treat it, obviously, we know much more differently than we would a lot of other countries and cultures really are, you know, honed in on that postpartum time. Like it is a sacred time. It is time for, as you know, like certain foods and things that are healing. And I find that so fascinating because I do take care of different cultures and things, and I see what they bring into the hospital. And it's so cool to me to watch how they care for the moms and babies. And it's like, it's just such a tender time. And I wish that like in the US we gave it that much care versus, you know, I've had women that have had to go back to work 2 weeks postpartum, and it like makes my heart ache so much. And it's just having the support, and there's just so much that goes into it. So I just, when I teach classes and things, I teach a breastfeeding class at work, and I just try to really prepare in the sense of just like, here's the knowledge. I don't want to overwhelm you with knowledge, but I want to give it to you so that you can feel confidence in saying, okay, I'm not going to remember all of this, but I'm going to remember what she said was, you know, something I don't need to worry about, and I can let that go and take that off my plate, and just really focus on that care, you know, in those first 40 days.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, like you said that really well. It's kind of this like acclimation period that is not deemed as important in our culture, unfortunately. And it really is like the fourth trimester of this dyad, you know, the mother baby dyad, except for now baby's on the outside. And but both mother and baby need to be cared for, like I would argue equally as much. And mom's often thrown kind of to the wayside, you know. So I think it's a really important time for both of them to, and the father or the partner, whoever's the other care person in that soon to be, you know, like triangle of care there, they all really need to be cared for because they have a huge transition that they're going through with this new little one, now a part of their life. So yeah, it is such a special and important time that in our culture, like you said, absolutely is not really viewed that way. And we have a lot we can learn from globally, you know, what traditional cultures do in many other countries. And I guess we are kind of a melting pot in a way here, but you know, if you were kind of born in North America and don't really have a lot of culture from your own family, it's often that like, it's very common, I would say, that, you know, there is not a lot of thought or preparation really given to this time period, or just like postpartum at all, even beyond the fourth trimester. Like it's all about the baby when the baby's still inside of mom. So when she's pregnant and then birth, and then after that, it's like, okay, you know, cool and exciting time is over. So then everyone kind of dissipates. And that's when I think mom and baby need people and community and support the most.
100%.
Which I'm sure you also see. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because like when I worked in pediatrics, I mean, we would, you know, we see them for their, you know, 2 days after they leave the hospital or ish, 2 to 5 days. And then, you know, a week later, or 2 weeks later, or 1 month, you know, and so on. And you see the baby so much, and you only have so much time with them, you know, in the clinic. And then it's like, but the mom gets, you know, a 6-week appointment and maybe a phone call, and as somebody like I, when I had my first baby, I didn't know, I definitely had postpartum depression with my first one, and I just tried to sweep it under the rug. I didn't know at the time what I was feeling, and I was ashamed by it, and I didn't really actually have any, you know, inkling of that until I started working more, you know, with moms and babies. And even when I had my third, I had postpartum depression that I go through these questionnaires with women every day, and I know the signs and symptoms, but I still even was like, oh, I'm just tired, or oh, I'm just this, or I would try to just sweep it under the rug until one day it was it was too much. And I was 6 months postpartum. And so it just goes to show that, things can pop up, far into your postpartum time. And even somebody who's educated in this, that's what really got me passionate about it. Like, I do this every day. I should have known, and I should have got help sooner, and I just putting pressure on myself. And then I finally did. And I'm like, why didn't I do this sooner? Why didn't I ask for help sooner? Why, I started therapy and I started a medication, and it just helped me so much. And it was like, why do we do that as women sometimes, where we just try to push through and get through things without, thinking we ask for help and we're weak or something like that. And that's not true at all. And so that's another thing that I really try to educate on before my patients go home. We do a lot of discharge education, and one thing is postpartum depression or anxiety or just perinatal mood disorders and things, and what to look for. And so I do a lot of educating with the significant other as well, saying, I want you guys to have that open connection, open communication, be able to verbalize what you're feeling and know that it's okay to verbalize that. Because I remember with my first, I had thoughts of like, I don't think my baby likes me, like what's going on, like just these odd thoughts and hard, difficult thoughts. And I didn't want to share them with my husband because it made me feel like I was doing something wrong, and I didn't know any better at the time. So you don't know what you don't know, but I just never want any person to feel scared about, getting those feelings out and letting them out to their significant other, because that's when you can really build your connection and support, and then get the help that you need to be the best that you can,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is giving me flashbacks of my like early postpartum time. And I had this like totally irrational but very real fear of leaving the house with my baby for the weirdest reason. It was mostly, for many reasons, but one of the reasons, which was totally strange, was like this fear of people perceiving me as like being an unfit mother, like that I looked too young, or like I didn't know what I was doing, and I was like coming off as inexperienced, and that people were going to be like judging me, and it's like this totally irrational fear, but it was crippling to the point where I was so scared to do anything and someone see and be like, oh, she's doing that wrong, or like, why is she, whatever. And yeah, it's just, there's so much, I think, like you said, pressure for us to just be the perfect parent or be the perfect mom. I think especially for women, and I'm sure fathers also experience this, but I think especially for moms, there is immense pressure to just do it all, to be superwoman and not need help and know exactly what you're doing, like straight out of the gate with your first child, and that everything should just intuitively come to you. And it's like, I know, and I preach to others that that's not true. And then you go through your own experience and you feel it. You really feel it, even though you know that it's irrational, and that you tell all the other women to not worry about that. And then that's, an impossible standard to uphold. And yet you feel the weight of the pressure from trying to uphold it. So yeah, it's just very interesting how it's so rampant, and it's really hard to, even when you're in the space and you like work in the air, to still really feel it. So I just want any listener out there who's maybe going through it or is about to go through it to know, like, if you do end up feeling that, even if you listen to all the podcasts and read all the books and have all the knowledge, you can still definitely feel that way. But it absolutely helps to have the knowledge, because then hopefully at that point you can kind of have that internal conversation with yourself and check yourself and be like, this is irrational. It's normal for me to feel this way. And hopefully it doesn't become crippling. But even if it does, there is help out there, and don't feel ashamed about it, because it's so common. And I think it stems from this lack of support that goes along simultaneously with this immense pressure. Like, it's just doubly hard.
Yeah, and we weren't meant to raise babies on our own and know it all on our own. I mean, centuries of, having the village. That's what they talk about, the village. We just don't have it all right now. I do like to talk to my patients too about, even in pregnancy, even if you don't have a physical village nearby, let's say you live far away from family, or you're doing this on your own, or whatever the case may be, ahead of time, try to kind of set up little things, whether it's a neighbor that you trust, that could bring you food when you need it, or whether it's joining we started a program at our YMCA, myself and one of our pediatricians, that is just like a parenting connection group. And it started kind of slow, because you can tell sometimes it's hard for people to kind of get into it and feel comfortable coming and talking or going over different topics, but it's really growing now, which is great, because it gives an outlet for parents, and they can either bring their kids or not bring their kids, and so there's things like that. There's Lactation leagues, there's all sorts of things that you can find community in, but it's not your direct, living in the household with you kind of community, but there are little ways to find the support that you might be lacking, but it is so important to have some kind of support when you're going through this postpartum time. And I mean, I have, like I said, 9, 6, and 3-year-old, and I still need support, so it doesn't really end.
No, that's something, those two things I talk about all the time, the village and the fact that postpartum is forever. I mean, there's like the different phases, there's like early postpartum and then later postpartum, but you're technically forever postpartum. Like, you're a mom now, right? So you're forever after having a child, and so it's really ongoing, and the support that is needed just kind of changes and evolves as time goes on, but you still need help. Like you said, we were not meant to do this alone, and yet we live in a culture that is very siloed, and we are led to believe that we should be able to do it on our own, but it's a bunch of BS, so don't buy into that.
Agreed.
So we might have already touched on some of your tips. I don't know. I feel like I could talk to you about this stuff forever. So we can dive into your top 10 tips now. If we already touched on some of them, you can just like kind of mention them. We don't have to go into detail, and then we can like recap them at the end. But I'll go ahead and let you give your tips.
I wouldn't say number one, but just one that really popped into my head right away, and it's because I needed it and I struggled with it, were boundaries. Learning to have boundaries early on. I know with our first baby, I mean, it was an urgent C-section. It was like we got to go soon, but it's not like we were rushing, right? So we went, it was middle of the night, had the C-section, and this was up at a hospital, different from where I work now, but in a big city. So like I had to go to a different unit then for my recovery, and then a different unit for my postpartum. So by the time we got back to our other unit, like my in-laws were there in the room, and just, we had just had the baby, and it was, probably at this time like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And so just even getting to hold my baby, he was already kind of getting passed around, but I didn't know any different. I didn't know any better. And so I wish I would have had some boundaries there. And then as time went on in the hospital, I had lots of family members coming in to visit, which is great at the time. It seemed like it. But now, knowing what I know and what I've experienced after that, I wish I would have had more boundaries and just had, just us there for the most part. Which everybody has their own preferences with that. So that's whatever you want it to be. But if you feel strongly about something, being able to voice it ahead of time before you get into that uncomfortable situation, like to your family, whether, you want it to just be you two at, delivery and the whole hospital stay, that, or maybe you don't want visitors for the first week, or maybe you do, so kind of just laying those boundaries with people ahead of time kind of gives them a heads up. And I think family they want to know what they can do to help. They sometimes feel that they need to be there to help, but maybe that's not what you need. And so I think being able just to voice like, hey, we would prefer to have like the first 2 days at home just be us. If I need you, I'll call, but we want to acclimate and get used to things. And, so there's ways of kindly saying it. And then also utilize if you're in the hospital birthing, utilize the nurses. We can be the people in between. If you're like, I really want it to be us, and if they come to visit, we can say, hey, they're, feeding right now and they prefer, we can be the bad guys, we can do that for you. But I think it just having boundaries and that's way easier said than done. I think Melissa Urban has a book on boundaries that I've been wanting to read. I struggled with it up until our last one, honestly, and we had our third baby during December of 2020 when we couldn't have visitors in the hospital, and honestly it was the best experience I've had because we got so much bonding, snuggling time. Nobody was taking her away, like she was just there, and it was amazing. I loved it. Now somebody else might say, no, I want somebody to hold the baby so I can rest, and that's totally fine too. So I mean, you just have to do what works best for you, but kind of talk with your partner about what boundaries are important for you guys and just make it known, and that's your right as a parent. And it's a really hard muscle to flex, I think, in the beginning, is to lay boundaries with family, because we know that relationships are very complex and it can lead to other things. But if you're just open and honest and say, this is just our preference and it has nothing to do with, how we feel about you, or, whatever the case may be, it's just, we need this time, because you don't get it back,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good one, boundaries. And the fact that you can
say,
lay
just
down new boundaries.
Can you please come hold this crying baby so I can go take a shower, So that's okay too. So, yeah, I think people just like to be told. My aunt, I have a bunch of aunts that live in town, and they knew, like, they would just come and drop off like tons of food at our door and then walk away, because I'm like, that's all I needed and that was so great. And then when I was ready for them, then they came over and, held the babies. But it's just the dropping off of food and having paper plates and things so I didn't have to do dishes and, those little things.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, so helpful to have that. Yeah, nourishment is a huge piece of it. Like the food part, I talk about that a lot. So love that. That's a great first tip.
Yeah. We already talked about the village. I think, again, it's another thing to kind of have ahead of time and prep for. So we already really touched on that. But, even finding people that are maybe in a similar situation as you, whether you're adopting, maybe finding other parents that are adopting too, so you can kind of connect on that. Or if you're a NICU parent, you'll meet other parents in the NICU and maybe get their number and connect with them, because that can be a traumatic time too, so having other people that can use experiences with you, I think, really sets you up for success in the sense of getting that mental health side, looking at it and saying, here's what I'm struggling with, and here's who I can lean on to have support. So I think just finding people that are in similar situations. Birthing after loss is a very difficult thing sometimes, and such a juxtaposition of feelings with that. You're happy, but there's just so much that goes into it, and maybe you need to kind of let that out with somebody that might understand and has been there too. So whether there's support groups with that, I like looking at those things ahead of time so you know what resources you have after you have the baby when you're exhausted and overwhelmed, and there's a lot going on, so it's hard to have the energy sometimes to seek out those resources. So just looking for those things ahead of time, I think, for your village is important. And then I think another one would be just having open discussions with your support person or significant other, whoever, if you're living with somebody that's helping you raise this baby. Again, and that's just one of my regrets, is not being able to open up. And I've known my husband since middle school. We're high school sweethearts. We're best friends, so I tell him everything. But that was one thing that when I was just feeling, I would cry in the shower. And, there was just things that I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. And I wish I would have been more open and been open to, talking with him or a therapist or, somebody to explain these feelings that I'm having, because I didn't understand them at the time. And so I think when you kind of, again, prep through pregnancy, like, hey, if you notice that I'm, shutting down or not, talking with you more, like, ask me what's going on, and that you're there to support, and that you're there to listen, and no judgment and things like that. Because we know that these are very common things, whether it's postpartum blues versus postpartum depression. And And men can have postpartum blues actually too. So this is, the first 2 weeks after delivering baby. It's a lot for both, both parents. There's sleep deprivation that goes into it. There's all sorts of things. So men can experience the baby blues, we call them. And so that's valid too. I always want the support people to feel comfort in knowing that they can speak out on their feelings as well. So just, yeah, having open conversations with each other.
Yeah, the communication piece can become very challenging once the baby's here. So I love that you add like kind of doing almost like a rehearsal while you're still
Yeah.
pregnant before, whether this is your first baby or your sixth baby, you're
Yeah.
still going to be going through a major change and adding a new person to your life. So, yeah, being able to openly communicate about what you need and how you're feeling, even if you don't know what you need, but just that you need support of some kind and maybe you're not sure what that is, and just having someone be able to listen to you and hear you out, your partner likely being the person who's going to be there the most with you, is so important, and it can be hard to express that in the moment. So yeah, I love that idea of doing that ahead of time and kind of getting, especially if communication is not your strong point, even
Yes.
when things are going really well and you struggle with being open and having that flow, that two-way street available. Yeah, because I say that from experience, because I am not always the best communicator, and my husband, I'm very lucky, is very patient with me, but it definitely, threw for a loop when I was pregnant, and then once, she was here, it became a lot harder for me to express what I need, and I needed so much more, which just made it even harder. So yeah, really, really focusing on being able to talk about things, and even going through some kind of, it's something that I offer as like, postpartum support and prep, that you can actually have someone guide you and kind of like counsel you and coach you through, because it can be really challenging. So it can be really helpful to have someone else, like a third party person, that's kind of helping to mediate and guide and prompt with certain things that you can practice and prepare with.
Yeah, I love that. The prep. You think about the big moments in life that we prep for, whether it's tests and different things, marriage. People go through premarital counseling sometimes, or you do all these things to prep for these big moments. But as far as prep goes for the postpartum time specifically, we have childbirth classes and we do breastfeeding classes and things, but there's not a lot on prepping for like what we really need help with, right? So I think if we can weave that in, that just helps so much. Um, I think too, another tip would be just not being afraid to. There's no dumb questions. Don't be afraid to call whoever your baby's provider is if you're just wondering, like, oh, is this normal? Is it not? Don't sit and stew over it. Just pick up the phone, or if you have a messaging system with your provider, don't ever be afraid, because it's usually something that we can easily ease your mind with, or have you come in and we'll talk about it. Or whether it's, I did a lot of lactation consults in pediatrics, and even when things are going great with breastfeeding, sometimes you just need validation, or you might think things are going great, and then the person that you go and see says, oh, like let's how does this make you feel? Or when you're pumping, what size flange are you using? Like there's little things you learn along the way that, oh, I could improve my output by switching my flange size. Or there's just all sorts of things that you might not realize and think things are okay, when you could have some optimization of things, or just getting that validation from somebody else, that yes, everything looks great, your baby looks great, they're healthy. Just having that validation, I think, is just such a confidence boost too, that it does make a big difference in your mental health. So just never being afraid to call and ask questions, or bring baby in if you're concerned.
Yeah, such a good one. As something that I always felt like, oh God, I'm just going to be calling and they're going to think that this is such a silly question and I'm wasting their time. Don't think
No.
that. This is literally their job, is to
Yes.
take your call, take your concern to heart, and either validate you and say everything's fine, totally normal that you're worried, but actually you're doing great and that's all well. Or, hey, yeah, like, let's have you come in because we want to check that out and make sure that everything's good. Either way, like, perfect reason to call. No,
Right.
there's no reason that's too small or silly. I love
Exactly.
that.
100%. Don't Google. Don't Google. That is,
No.
I mean, it's a nice tool when you need it, but just call and ask the question.
Yeah.
That's the best thing you can do. Um, and then, this is again just something that's so much easier said than done, but taking time for yourself in different ways than how you would think of, quote unquote self-care. But I think we get very, as if you're, whether you're breastfeeding, formula feeding, a combination of both, it's a lot. It's a lot to keep a baby fed and changed and happy and falling asleep. And it's like you finish one task and you're on to the next and then you're starting over again. And so I think just when you can take those moments, whether it's to go take a bath, go outside and go for a walk, if your significant other or mother-in-law or father-in-law, whoever, can come over and just, when you're ready for it, and take that time to hold baby. And it's a great time for bonding with other people as well. So your significant other, maybe that's their bonding time with baby while you go take your nightly bath, or whatever it might be that comforts you, even just sitting and reading. Or it is easier said than done, because I think as women, we have such that like maternal instinct. If we hear the baby cry or anything, we're just like, it's hard to enjoy yourself, right? It's hard to sit there and just take that time, because, like, well, I could fix that with, giving them my boob, So it's one of those things where it's like, you have to be okay with it, but it's a learning curve and it takes time to get there. I always, talk about when you start to introduce the bottle, sometimes babies can really sense that you're right there, and they will know, like, hey, I'm not going to take this bottle. Mom's right there. Like, whatever it is. So sometimes you physically have to leave the house, when you're trying something new like that. And so getting okay with that as well. Or even just going for a walk, even if you have baby in the winter time in Wisconsin, like, you can still like put them in a front pack and go walk just down the block and back. Sometimes just being in nature is very like resetting. And so I think just getting outside can do a lot for your mental health. And so I think taking time in whatever way that looks for you. What did you enjoy before you had babies? Sometimes those things aren't always as feasible after, but you can weave things in that you enjoy. And even if it's just 10-15 minutes a day of just complete you time, you have to nurture yourself in order to nurture anything else. And we all know that. And again, I know it's easier said than done, but I think it's so important.
Yeah. Again, it really helps in this circumstance as well, because this is so important to have time for yourself, and it's really hard to come by, and it can be really helpful. Something be prepped for in advance that you've already, and this is where the communication piece comes in too, right? With your partner, like, you've already had the conversation of, hey, I'm gonna need some time every day, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes to like wash my face or go on that little walk, or it could be whatever makes you happy. That one thing that's just, it's non-negotiable, and I really, really would just like for it to be able to happen daily. It doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same time every day, but just at some point, can I have this time? And it could be longer. It could be 30 minutes. It could be, whatever works for you and your family and the dynamic and how much support you have. But really kind of planning for that and preparing for that before baby is even here, so that you kind of have that relieving feeling of like, okay, I know that I have my time. It's like something to look forward to, a little snippet of something nice or relieving or relaxing, where maybe you're not getting triggered by your baby crying, or the fact that breastfeeding isn't going so well, or the fact that you're trying to switch to bottles, or the fact that you're trying to get them on a schedule of some kind with napping and it's not working, or whatever it might be, that is like, you're just like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's just one moment to the next of anxiety or uncertainty or just exhaustion. It can be so rejuvenating to just have even that small snippet of time to yourself. And every mom is different. Maybe you know, what you want that to look like is very unique to you, but it's important, I think, to have that and to protect it. So I love that tip.
Absolutely. I mean, and it transfers into all of parenthood. I mean, there's always stressors at toddlerhood, preteen, there's going to be stressors all throughout. And so you have to, if you start it early, you will continue having that in time for yourself that you need. For me, it's like, I don't know, I love baths for some reason. And so like at least twice a week, we'll get home. It'll be a crazy night. And I'm like, Trent, I'm going to go take a bath. And he's like, he knows that's like my cue for mama needs a break. And so I bring a book up or my tea and, I just chill for like a good 30 minutes or more. And then like for him in the summer, he loves golfing and I know that. So, it's like and then we find things that we enjoy. And as long as we both know like, hey, we both need this time, we try to make it work for each other. And then of course you have your like, well, you got to go golfing for 8 hours today, so I'm going to go, there's just, sometimes we have a little banter with it, but yeah, you gotta make time for both of you.
Yeah. I was going to point that out because I was actually listening to another podcast where that was a topic of, that came up in the conversation of like, self-care and time for yourself as a mom, and how it's funny because the activities or like the hobbies that a lot of males have take so much more time. They're like, yeah, my husband dirt bikes. He has to like go get his dirt bike, put it in a, whatever, drive miles and miles away to some location, and then he's gone for like, he's doing that for like 2 or 3 hours, and then it's like he's been gone for 6 hours, and then it's like, oh, now it's mom's day on Saturday or whatever, and I go to a yoga class that takes maybe 60 to 75 minutes, and then what do I go hang out at a coffee shop for like another 5 hours? It's like, what do I do? So sometimes it can feel a little unbalanced with like, the types of activities that we're kind of leaning towards doing versus them, but at least having something. And also it's important as your kids get older to have kind of started that from the newborn phase on of like, no, like mom needs her time, dad needs his time, we each need our time, like to be on our own as individual people. That's healthy, that's normal, but you're also modeling that to your kids as they get older, right? And they're seeing you not just sacrifice everything that you care about and anything that you're interested in for the family, like the fact that you actually have goals and aspirations and hobbies and interests that are your own. I think that's very healthy to model to your kids so that they don't grow up thinking that like their interests and concerns and hobbies and needs don't matter, because you want them to believe that they do.
Yeah, I love that, because I think just our generation, we grew up with, parents that I don't know, maybe were more like, they didn't show that, I guess my parents had 5 kids and they had a business and they were busy and it was just go, go, go and self-sacrificing and, things like that. And so I think that was hard for me in the beginning of parenthood, thinking like, if I take time for myself, like that I was taking away from time with my kid, and that, and I think we are in such the nice part of social media, I think is that, it is showing people that, hey, you can take time for yourself. This is normal. This is good for you, but it's also very good for your kids to see that. So I love that point you made with that, just because it's something that we may not have learned in our generation from our parents, but we're teaching our children that, and that's really cool.
Yeah. Yep. That's so right. We're that generation that's realizing that, oh, that actually maybe wasn't the best way of doing it. And it might have been exactly what they needed to do, right? But we are in different times. We're a different generation, and we are realizing that, hey, like we want to do this different, and we want to show our kids that, time for yourself and rest is productive, right? Like I think that's a big thing, is that rest was not perceived as productive in the generations before us at all. It was seen as like lazy and unproductive and not useful of our time, which is just not true, because that can run us into the ground and affect our health. And if we don't have our health, like what's the point of anything? So
absolutely
love that.
And it just draws it all in, that I think one of the biggest things with postpartum is just our mental health in general. It's a huge change in our lives, whether it's, like you said, your first or your fifth baby. It's still a huge change in the family. And really, it all does boil down to our mental health, whether it goes, well or is not going well. The whole family together, how we're all working together and how we're feeling and the support we're getting. That's, I mean, physically, yes, there's a lot of physical changes and there can be pains with that and different things, but it boils down to the mental health, and I think luckily we're seeing that more and more is it's getting noticed and the importance of it, but it is hard for people to access therapists sometimes and different things that we do need. And so I'm hoping that improves for our children too. But I think it's already drastically improved from our parents' time. Like, I know my mom definitely could have, she probably, with 5 children, she probably needed, access to a therapist, but she never, it just wasn't something that you did back then. And now it is just becoming so much more common to reach out and get the help you need and know that you don't have to be ashamed for having postpartum depression or anxiety or anything like that. And that it's we're all in it together and we're all experiencing different things. And it's just getting talked about so much more. So I love that we have a generation like we do. I'm really proud of our generation, actually, for bringing all of this to the light,
Yeah, totally. It's been hard work, I think, as, collectively, but yeah, it's so important.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as other tips, I think we really touched on a lot of the things that I had written down. I just said, again, to know the signs and symptoms of postpartum depression or anxiety or postpartum mood disorders, just knowing those ahead of time. So we did talk about that, and asking for that help right away, because there's no, you can't say well, I just have a little bit of postpartum depression, even if it's just what you consider to be a small amount, you still can get help with that. It doesn't mean you have to be at a certain level to ask for a therapist. So you don't have to settle. You don't have to settle for what's going on. You can get help if you're able to. And I think just knowing what those signs and symptoms are again, and just being open. And then taking we talked about prenatal classes and things. And yes, you might not remember everything from them. There's all sorts of forms of them, whether it's through a birthing center or your hospital or online or, whatever it is that interests you. There's so many different kinds, but I think just, again, I'm such a believer in knowledge is power. There's so many free classes out there. I think everybody should have access to the knowledge that they need. And so don't be afraid to look for resources ahead of time. Have the knowledge of what's normal, what's not, so that you can go into it feeling confident just in little things that can kind of stop you from spiraling as we do sometimes when we're feeling very overwhelmed. That's where I really bring the partner in too, is the partner sometimes will remember things that you might not remember from your classes, just because, maybe you're feeling more sleep deprived today than they are, and they're like, oh, but remember she said this, that we were going to see this, or that their poop was going to change from, dark brown to green to yellow, and it would be seedy, and, those little things that you're like, is this normal? Is it not? Your partner might remember. So I think it's good to bring them to your classes if you can, or somebody, whether any kind of support person with you to classes, just because you're both going to pick out different things that you remember, and that will help you in the long run. Just to validate what's going on.
Absolutely. That's such a good idea. Such a good idea, because I know my memory is awful lately. I don't know what it's related to, but I don't know, just kind of brain fog stuff going on. It might have to do with my nutrition or the fact that, I'm 2 years out postpartum, but you can still be quote unquote recovering and replenishing from postpartum. Even I am a dietitian, so it's not like I have a knowledge deficit on these things, but it can, it's a lot on the body and on your mind and everything. So yeah, it's important to have other people, because they can help support you and remember things that maybe you didn't remember from a class, or some important bit of information that can put your mind at ease down the road. So I love that as well. So these have been wonderful. I think, if I'm thinking of how to kind of recap them, but a lot of them, if not all of them, just really kind of show how important support is. They're all forms of support in the postpartum. And, those first 40 days can be a really emotionally turbulent time. Your hormones are kind of adjusting back to normal. And if you're breastfeeding, then they're not really back to normal yet, because they're going to stay a little bit wonky, right, so that breastfeeding can be sustained for however long. And this can definitely alter the way that you're feeling, your emotions, and how you're feeling physically. You're healing from birth, whether you had a vaginal delivery or a C-section, which is a major surgery. So there's a lot of physiological things going on with you on top of emotional and mental things going on. So that support just becomes so, so crucial. Yeah. Setting boundaries, communicating with your partner effectively, ideally practicing all this stuff before the baby even arrives, maybe hiring help to, a coach or someone to help you plan for the postpartum, and talk about nutrition and how you're going to feed yourself and your family during that time, which becomes even harder and even more important. I love it. I love all this stuff that, not being afraid to call your provider and ask the quote unquote silly or dumb questions, because they're not silly or dumb. No question is too small. Your concerns are valid. Everything you're feeling is probably normal. And if it's not, that's why you're calling, so that we can assess that it's not and get you the help that you need. So I love this. Just underline support 20 times over, and really drives it home.
And just that preparation, ahead of time, I think makes a big difference. But one quick little tip too that I just thought of, that is more, not so much on the support side, but when we talk about the first 40 days and the transition of, baby acclimating to our world, and we know that they go through different phases of crying, and whether, some people will jump and say that it's colic when maybe it's actually not, and that's a good question for your doctor. But one thing that you can do when your baby is just, you've fed them, you've changed them, you've rocked them, you've done everything you can, and they're still just fussy, skin to skin is a huge reset button. We do it from the get-go after delivery. It's great for temperature regulation for them. It stabilizes their blood sugars. It's familiar. If you think about being immediate postpartum, your baby's used to your heartbeat and just the whooshing sounds of your heart and the movements and the breathing and all of that. So putting baby skin to skin, whether it's with you or if you feel like, you need a break and it's with the support person, it just really helps them to relax. And when they get their chest on, they've got like these 4 points on the front of their body that when they kind of make that connection with you, they just kind of melt in. And so I always say if your baby's super fussy, it's a nice reset button, but it's also good if you have a very sleepy baby that you need to like get up to feed and things, get them undressed, put them skin to skin. They kind of root around or look for the bottle or whatever it is. And so I think just having the knowledge that it is quote unquote normal. You want to keep in touch with your provider, but babies go through a process of, there's actually a website called, I think, the Period of Purple Crying, and purple is like an acronym for what babies actually go through in that first month. And so it talks a lot about the physiological reasons why babies cry, and what's normal and what's not, and when to call your provider and all these things. But it gives you, again, that knowledge ahead of time, like, oh, okay, I'm doing everything right. We're going to have these moments, but it actually is very interesting to read about it. I think there's a video on that website too that one of our providers will give our patients too, just so that they can kind of understand it from a different perspective. And if you think about it, like babies coming out into this cold, bright world, it's very different for them. So mimicking the womb is one that I like to teach too. So you're going to have like a darker room when baby's really fussy, turn the TVs off, the shushing sounds, like sounding like the womb, the rocking back and forth. Some babies really like to be swaddled because that's what they're used to in the womb. So those are just the other two kind of things that just kind of came to my head too, about just mimicking the womb and skin to skin time are a really nice way to reset when things feel overwhelming. And also knowing that it's okay to set your baby down in their crib in a safe spot if you are just, very overwhelmed and they're crying and you need to walk away. It is okay to go set them down and just walk away. They're safe. You can take a second to do some deep breathing, do what you need to do, and then restart again. It doesn't make you a bad parent. It makes you a really good parent to know when you need to just stop and take a break. And so just know that that's okay and that's safe to do. Okay. So.
I'm so glad you added that. I actually had to get permission from a therapist to do that. And it's like, I mean, I'm glad I did and I was able to do it, but I wish that I would have just given myself permission sooner, knowing she's in her crib, she's safe. Yes, she's screaming, but I am about to lose it. I was getting to the point where I was actually getting concerned because I had never really understood, you see those billboards and people saying don't shake your baby. And I was like, why would you ever even have the thought of shaking your baby? I got to the point where I was like, I get it. I actually feel scared that not that I would necessarily hurt her, but that I would not be gentle and loving towards her what she deserves, because I'm to this point where I can't regulate myself anymore and I need a break. So I'm so glad you said that, because I think that we need to hear it from other people, that either that they've been there and so they get it, and also that it's totally fine that
when significant others are going back to work and you're just all of a sudden on your own with this baby and you're recovering from either a vaginal delivery or a C-section, and it's a lot. And so just knowing that, thank you for sharing that, because I think just when people hear this more and more and more, they realize, okay, I'm not alone in these feelings. I can talk about this and I can get help, and it does not make me a bad parent to talk about it. So I think just that communication, again, it comes up again, just being able to talk about it.
Yeah, 100%. And whether that's with your partner, with a therapist, both, with a friend, with another person who has children, who can kind of maybe they have older kids, and you can, hey, did this happen with you? How did you get through this? Whether that's your own mom who's had you, at least, or someone else that an aunt, anyone that you can chat with and just be candid. Yeah, these were so good. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Thank you for having me. And I just want to, let parents know that you're not alone in it. You are, anything that you're going through or feeling, I can guarantee another parent has felt the same way. So ask for the help, and it'll just make it all a little bit better in the long run.
And things will get better, right? Everything is a season, and eventually this too shall pass, and it will eventually come to an end, and then a new phase will begin. So also I think it can be comforting to remember that. It can be hard to remember that in the moment when you're really in it, because it feels like it won't ever end. And I've been there thinking oh my God, this is my life now forever. My baby's never sleeping again when they're going through a regression or whatever, right? It's this is my life. My baby's just gonna cry forever and never sleep. I mean, logically we know that's not true. Eventually they have to sleep, but it can feel forever. So
well, thank you.
Where can listeners find you, Natalie, if they want to reach out and connect with you?
Well, I am taking a little bit of a break from social media. I do have a page on Instagram called Rooted Latch. And so there is some information on there, random things, tips and things. But I do have a Substack page. It's called Rooted Well. And so you can find me on there, Natalie Henning. And I post maybe once a week or so at most now, different things. So just kind of more just overall general family life, things like that. So just kind of enjoying my social media break at this time, but maybe I'll be back. We'll see.
Yeah. Take all the time you need. Social media can be such a energy and a time suck. I'm kind of grappling with that as well myself. So I'm proud of you for taking the time for yourself. That was kind of a big theme of today's episode. So good
Yeah,
for you.
that's true. That's true. Aw. Well, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We'll link all that in the show notes, and yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at the.moms.nutritionist and subscribe to this channel to be notified of each new episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast even further, please like this video and share it with a friend or anyone who could benefit from watching. This helps get the word out there, which helps moms heal and thrive.